Do I have too much in RSPs? Hey there, I'm Cameron Young, Certified Financial Planner, and today we're going to be looking at Reddit to answer your RSP questions. Let's dive in. Let's Hide My Identity asks, do I have too much in RSPs? This is a pretty classic question that people worry that, have I put too much money into RSPs? Especially the older way of thinking was always all your savings in RSPs and then you enjoy a healthy retirement. But the truth behind RSPs is that when this money is coming back out, it is 100% taxable in your hands. And sometimes you can end up in a scenario where you have so much money in RSPs that the minimums that the government forces you to take out puts you into such a high tax bracket that you might actually lose some of your government benefits, such as old age security. I've had clients before that have had $2 million, $2.5 million RSPs, and then the minimums they're forced to take out in retirement are so large that their benefits that they've worked for their entire life, such as old age security in Canada, actually get clawed back, and then sometimes they lose all of it. Especially if you're mixing in other sources, such as maybe you have a defined benefit pension. Maybe you're working at a part-time gig in retirement that way. There's a lot of things that having too much RSP can actually become a bit of a problem. Really, what you do want to have is a healthy balance of both RSP and TFSA assets. RSPs are very useful for deferring taxes down the road and hopefully minimizing them by withdrawing it when you're in a lower tax bracket. But having the TFSA available to you as well as a tax-free source of income is also extremely important. You shouldn't just put all your money into RSPs just to get that sweet tax return at the end of the year. The most important thing that you can do is make RSP contributions when it makes sense to do so. And especially knowing that down the line, this money is going to have to come back out and you're going to have to pay tax on it. Will you be in a lower tax bracket than you're in now? These are the questions that you need to ask yourself. But I think for most Canadians, having RSP savings is a good thing, but they should also be taking advantage of the tax-free savings account and investing with that as well. That's a great question. Let's move on to the next one. Swimming Recover 6563 asks, should I prioritize my RSP or my TFSA if I already have a pension plan? For some added context, they're making about $130,000 a year in Quebec, have a pension plan through their work. This is an interesting question, especially because there can be benefits to still contributing to an RSP even if you do have a pension plan. A few reasons for this is RSPs are best maximized when your income is higher. Typically, you would want to save your RSP room for your highest income earning years to get the biggest benefit out of it. But that's not to say that making an RSP contribution, even when you have a pension plan, is necessarily a bad thing. However, I think in this scenario that contributing to a tax-free savings account as the majority of your savings probably makes the most sense, especially since this user noted that they're 31 years of age, relatively young. There's a lot of runway for your tax-free to start compounding and growing as aggressively as possible. Taking advantage of that tax-free savings account room will go a long way. The biggest issue with having a pension plan and large RSPs at the same time is the taxability of it in retirement. So if you're collecting this large pension from your employer, but you also have RIF income to pull from, your tax bracket ends up being pretty high overall, and you can actually start losing certain government benefits like old age security if you hit their clawback thresholds. That's where having a tax-free savings account can be really nice, especially if you've grown it to a pretty sizable amount where you can supplement tax-free income into your other income streams to make sure that your overall tax level stays low. Because truthfully, in retirement, that's the name of the game, is keeping your taxable income level as low as possible. So I think in this case, TFSA probably makes the most sense, but that's not to say that when you're making $130K a year and you're already in a decently high tax bracket, that there wouldn't be a benefit to your RSP. The biggest thing is when you have a pension, you lose a lot of RSP room to your pension adjustment every single year. So you don't have a ton of room to begin with. And there's definitely an argument to be made to say you should probably defer that RSP room till your highest income earning years. But I don't think it's a mistake per se to contribute to your RSP anyways. But the TFSA should probably be your priority. Hotfly3963 asks, my TFSA is maxed out. Do I max out my RSP now? It's an interesting question because I think the next natural thing to do is, okay, TFSA is done. Let's just dump my money into RSPs. And while this might be an okay strategy, it's pretty dependent on your income levels. For example, say you were making 40 or 50K a year, you certainly could put money into your RSPs and max them out. However, the actual tax benefit that you get from it won't be that great. This user as well notes that they do have a defined benefit pension. They also have an RDSP. So come retirement time, they're going to have income from a bunch of different sources. They'll have CPP, old age security, their RDSP funds, their defined benefit pension, and now potentially RSP funds on top of it. Essentially what this means is you're going to have a lot of income from a lot of sources, and your tax bracket naturally will be quite high. So if you're contributing to an RSP when your tax bracket's pretty low and then pulling out later down the road and paying more tax on it, it's kind of a very inefficient and backwards way of utilizing the RSP. Really, RSP contributions should be done when your income is higher, and then in retirement when you're pulling it out, you'll be at a lower tax bracket, essentially just saving yourself some of the tax that way. It's a little tough to answer the question without knowing the specifics of exactly how much money they're making, what province they're in, what their tax brackets might be. And not that RSPs are a bad move per se, but now that your TFSA is maxed out, you could contribute some funds to, say, a non-registered account, invested in something that is taxed relatively favorably within a non-registered account. So something like capital gains, generating investments, that's taxed the most favorably here in Canada, and then dividends second. Kind of want to avoid any sort of interest producing investments within that account. And then what you can essentially do every year, your TFSA limit goes up. If you don't have the funds to do so, maybe you can take some of that non-registered money, redeploy it over to your TFSA, or if you're in a very high income earning year, put some money into RSPs from those funds that way. That probably makes the most sense given your situation. Like I noted, there's, some other pieces of information that are missing that would help us go a long way with determining, does an RSP contribution make sense? Because the answer isn't always just, yes, your TFSA is done, now you max out your RSP. From a strategic standpoint, it might actually make sense for you to hold on to some of that RSP room and make those contributions when you're in a much higher income earning bracket. Well, as always, it kind of depends on where you are in your life and what your income potential might be, and you should always consult your financial planner. Great question. Let's move on to the next one. Gilby1993 asks, what is the average to have in your RSP and TFSA as a 49-year-old? Just wondering if I'm behind or ahead. I love this question personally because there truly is no set number on the amount you should have at a certain age. A lot of Canadians, they hear these myths and other things around that you need $500,000 to retire, or you need $1 million in your accounts in order to retire. And these numbers truly are not applicable to every single person out there. What really matters is your lifestyle and how much you're planning to be spending in retirement. So when retirement comes around, if you're spending, $5,000, $6,000, $7,000 a month, yeah, there's a very strong chance you might need $1 million in your retirement account in order to fund your retirement and make sure you don't run out of money. On the flip side, if you live a very frugal lifestyle, you're not going out, you're not really traveling, your house is paid off, your expenses are low, you might not need $1 million, and it might even be overkill. You could probably get away with a lower amount just because you're spending a lot less, maybe only $2,000 a month, and your investments can keep up with that. Really, it does come down to the lifestyle and the expenses that you're going to have in retirement. And then based off those expenses, you can kind of figure out, okay, well then what does my investment figure need to be? So there is no, if one person has $1 million in retirement and the other person has $500,000 in retirement, that the $1 million person is farther ahead. Because if they spend a lot more than the other person, they might actually not have enough money themselves, but maybe the $500,000 person can get along just fine. It's very much a question of your lifestyle and your expenses that way, and it's something you should probably always be working with your financial planner with. As a rule of thumb, saving something, whether it's to TFSA or RSPs, will generally always be beneficial to you in the long run, so you're not just banking off government benefits such as CPP and old age security. Having those excess investments gives you a lot more flexibility in retirement and will allow you to live kind of the retirement that you're looking for. It's a great question. Let's take a look at the next one. Megan Chan asks, are RSPs worth it? So a little bit of extra added context here. This individual is 30 years old. They've maxed out their TFSAs and have a good chunk of money in non-registered accounts, but haven't put a whole lot into RSPs, and they're making generally between $50,000 to $70,000 a year. Are RSPs worth it is an interesting question because, generally speaking, the math is if you're contributing to an RSP, you want to be doing so in a higher tax bracket than you will be in retirement. And obviously that can be a bit of a tough thing to predict of how much money you're going to be making in retirement. But the whole idea behind RSPs is you make a contribution, you get whatever tax bracket you're in essentially back as a tax refund at the end of the year. So if you're in a 30% tax bracket, you put in $1,000, you're going to get $300 back based off your tax bracket to your wallet. Typically that should be reinvested either in a TFSA or the RSP again. Some people just spend it. But then the idea is when you take that $1,000 back out of your RSP in retirement, your goal should be into a lower tax bracket than when you contributed it. So if you're in a 20% tax bracket, for example, that $1,000 is only getting taxed at 20% now. $200 in taxes, you essentially saved yourself $100 in income tax. It's not a way of eliminating tax altogether, it's just lowering the amount that you're going to pay. So the question being, are RSPs worth it? The short answer is yes, but only if you're in a higher tax bracket and know that you're going to be pulling that money back out in a lower tax bracket. Typically speaking, as a rule of thumb, if you're making north of $100,000, RSPs will almost always be worth it because it's not often that in retirement, you're also pulling over $100,000 in taxable income that way. As always, it's really going to depend on what your earnings are going to be, what your potential is later in life. If you're in a career path that might skyrocket from an income standpoint, you might actually want to hold on to some of that RSP room and make some of those contributions then. On the flip side, if you're in a career path where, your earnings are going to stabilize around a set amount, kind of below that $100,000 marker, the TFSA would be the preferred first approach to do so, and then you can sprinkle in some RSPs. Once your TFSA is maxed out, however, not that RSPs are a bad choice per se, but they're just less efficient than your other options out there. Those were some great RSP questions. Let me know if you guys have any more in the comments below.